So this will be a relatively short video presentation because most of the work really will happen on Monday morning when we have the Zoom or the in-studio session with our model. But I thought I would preview some of the techniques that we're going to be working with when Pete comes to model, probably as a fisherman with a boat. And I'll record that session, so if you want to work with that material afterwards, if you're not able to come Monday morning, or if you want to review it, I'll give you a link so that you can look at that. But I've also been looking at some of my own material and thinking, I mean, the sea has really been one of my themes over the years, and I'm thinking of doing some more work based on this theme, and maybe revisiting some of the images that I've been working with, but in a different way. So I'm going to be using, just for these demonstrations now, some of this material, photographs of the children on the West Coast. And as I say, I'll preview a couple of techniques that we'll work with on Monday. And if you're either attending by Zoom or reviewing the Zoom later, you might want to try these. So many of you are familiar with this. It's a sharpened stick, a stick of willow, and a pot of Indian ink. And I'm going to do some drawings of some of these figures, working with firstly an ink line. So any kind of sharpened stick should work. Many of you will probably have pens as well. I prefer sticks to pens, partly because you get a slightly less predictable mark, and as a consequence you probably have to be a little bit more inventive about how you use this implement, and with that inventiveness tends to come, I think, more interesting, more instinctive marks, reactions to your subject. So a sharpened stick, or possibly a pen, and I'm going to do this in 2 or 3 stages. It's white cartridge paper, and I'm going to do everything just in line. So I'm outlining this figure, and I'll maybe get a bit of boat, because as I say, on Monday we're going to have a small boat in the studio for Pete to model around. So it might be good to relate some of the figures that I draw to the boat. So that's the linear element. I will do a tiny bit more to this face. Here we can get a few marks for features. And then I'm going to let it dry and put some wash on top. And the wash will be dilute ink, the same Indian ink that I'm using here, but diluted with water. And then when the wash is dry, I could do a third layer, a third element, which would be a little bit of chalk. Okay, so let's pause while that dries. So that's almost dry. There are some quite thickly painted, drawn areas of ink where the ink is still a bit wet and might pick up the wash, but that's quite interesting when that happens. It'll bleed a bit. So I've got some wash. I'm not sure about the strength of this. I've just diluted the ink with water. I think it might be a bit thin, actually. Let's try it out. Let's try it out on the boat. It's okay. I think it'd be better if it was a bit stronger. So I'll just add a couple of drops of ink to that wash mixture. The ink is amazingly strong, and you don't need many drops to darken it, but that's a bit stronger. So there we go. Get a bit on the boat. It looks like I'm going to might pick up. Oh, I haven't actually. It has dried. So this is waterproof ink that I'm using. I think most, I don't know, they've all Indian inks are waterproof, but it means that you can put some wash across. I've just put a bit on the boat there, and it has obviously picked up some from a wet bit, which I don't mind, as I prefer the darker wash. Then I will look with my eyes half closed at my model, or at my photograph of my model, and she's wearing a kind of black wetsuit or something. So most of the clothing I'm just blocking in. I have a piece of sponge here which I think is better than a brush because it helps me to be looser, so I can't fill in absolutely, and I end up doing things a little bit more loosely, spontaneously. There are often almost broken bits to a sponge, so I might get a kind of brush mark, which is quite nice. So instead of just flatly covering her with wash, I end up with something slightly more broken, which I think works pretty well. The wash, applying the wash, you will have seen has only taken a sort of minute. So that is something to do quickly, broadly, and I'm just going to add a few more bits of ripple. So there we've given her a slight context. So that would be one of the techniques that I'll get you to try. We'll have Pete modelling, I'll get him to move around the boat. We'll start with some ink lines, then we'll apply some wash, and as I said, potentially apply a bit of chalk as well as a third layer. So when the wash layer is dry, you can potentially do a couple of things. You can apply chalk. I think maybe, for example, I might get a little bit of chalk onto her legs, maybe even onto the face. The part of the idea of having a single strength wash is that it's good to force yourself, I think, just to get a very decisive contrast between light and dark. You can simplify, abstract like that, but it is quite nice in places, not so much to correct, but just to add a more subtle variation in the tone, breaking it up with the white chalk. And also because the chalk is a very distinct layer, you're adding more depth to your drawing. And by the same token, you can actually use charcoal very well to alter the sort of tonal pattern very slightly. And maybe her wetsuit's a little bit too flat, I don't know. Anyway, so I can add something extra with a charcoal and a chalk layer. So we'll arrange the poses such that you can return to a drawing, having put down some wash, some ink and then some wash. You can return to it with a third layer of chalk and charcoal. So if you're doing this at home, you could we'll organise. If you're rerunning the video, I don't know what I'm trying to say. You could certainly organise yourselves to work in layers. Then the other thing I'd like to try in the studio is starting with a charcoal rub away drawing, but doing a kind of cumulative composition, by which I mean we'll have the boat in the studio. So I haven't got a boat at the moment, but I've got quite a nice photograph, or several photographs of some boats. And I'm just going to put down the boat with my simplified charcoal technique. And then I'm going to start adding figures around this boat to illustrate how it's going to be in the studio when Pete offers us different poses at different positions around the boat. And we've put them all together into the same drawing. So charcoal rub away, you need a rubber. So my boat doesn't need to be too precise yet, but maybe just to make some sense of what I'm trying to do, I'll just rub away slightly so we can see where exactly this boat is meant to be. So let's say I've got something like that working with my boat, and then I want to have some figures, and they come from different sources. So first I've got someone in the boat here who is rowing. So again, you'll remember this technique. One way of approaching it is not to do lines, but to try and slide the charcoal around. Just reassessing there, I think it should be higher. Slide the side of the charcoal around the page. And because it's an approach that you gradually refine, it's not about getting exactly the right marks, shapes from the start. It's something that is gradually altered, maybe partly through the eraser, which when you look at that drawing, you must think is a mercy. So this gentleman is wearing a hat in the boat, and I want to get that arm up there. So just gradually refining negative and positive shapes. I need to add a few more positive shapes. I'll actually add some lines now because it's going to make more sense. But I'll move back and forth between the lines and the shapes, between adding with the charcoal and subtracting with the eraser, until I get my man in a life jacket in his boat. Okay, so there's him. Now, what's happened to me might happen to you. I think my boat needs to be a bit bigger. But this is the wonder of charcoal rub away. We can chop and change very easily and move things around. And that will be helpful, because if I'm now going to start adding other figures. Okay, so we've got a man in a boat. But as I said, I want to combine this with some others. So maybe I'll try... wish I had a bit more room, but I'll go for this figure over here from another source. It's the same girl who was in my ink drawing, and she is at the end of the boat, leading it. So I've got a figure in the boat, and I've got a figure outside it at one end, and I would quite like to have another one. Who have I got? I could have one. I don't know, this one would work. It might do. He's at the other end. So I may not have exactly worked out my material, but it's good actually, I think, to be... It's good if what I demonstrate isn't straightforward, so we can identify the things that need to change in order for it to work for you, for example. So there she is there, and a little bit of the subtracting. As I subtract in this case, I'm just making a kind of watery pattern. I'm trying to get some of the texture of the water, so that she not only stands out because it's lighter behind her, but also there's the background recedes because it has its own texture. There we go, that works all right. I could do more, and this chap over here, I think, because he's bending right down, he might not work, and it's a bit silly because he's at the end of the boat. He's going to get run over. Nope, that's not going to work. Never mind. Anyway, I've demonstrated a couple of figures there. We could have just one more. Yes, there's one over here that could do it. So this is really to give you an example of obviously you know about charcoal rub away drawings, but also using several poses which our model will give us separately, using several poses to build up a kind of composite that ideally is convincing. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to be achieving here, that I convince you that you don't have to have 3 models around the boat at the same time. You can actually produce something based on several poses. You can't even see that. Several poses working together. So that's a couple of things that we'll do. We'll have Pete for 3 hours, and if he gives us these different poses, we can get some suggestions from you as well. If you've already got some ideas from the preparatory work you've been doing thus far, you might have some ideas about how you would like him to pose in order to give you material for your compositions on the theme of the sea. And then just lastly, just kind of personally, as I said, I've been doing, the sea has been a bit of a theme for me. And there's a whole number of images that I've just found, paintings, where I suppose what I was working with, can't see that, can you, was the idea of using boats. I mean, boats just as fabulous subject matter, but maybe something to do with the children, life's journey, scale. I was quite excited about doing some of these images that were a combination of big boats and little boats. All I'm doing is getting you reflections here. So boy with a little boat, as well as boys in other boats. And this one actually, this is my nephew, Oscar, who is severely autistic, and he often just used to sit in the boat on his own and not go anywhere. So that was a nice way of expressing his particular constitution. So what I'm showing you this for is that I'm going to start producing some work myself, exploring this theme a bit further. So these children that are all in my pictures on little journeys have more or less left home now and are on bigger journeys. So I'm hoping that I can find some way of using this theme of the sea and some of this material to produce some more work of my own. Okay, so see you Monday, and I'm sorry that was much longer than it was meant to be, but I hope it's valuable to get a demonstration of the sorts of techniques we'll use when we have a model. All right, see you Monday then.